So as Nick gets set up, just a quick comment on Nick. I think in the past, I don't know how long it's been in the past. We'll just say a year and a half, 2.5 years. And Nick's been on a meteoric rise in the automation industry. I think he puts out his own training courses by the day. Anything regarding advanced complex networking to automation. He just has some of the most intense focus that I think I've seen from the periphery on what he produces. And I've even had clients say, while they're in meetings, Nick's sending emails, on calls, committing code, all simultaneously. So some amazing things for the community too.
Okay, my name is Nick Russo. This session is going to be a little bit different and for 3 reasons. Earlier we had a session by Matt that was very kind of higher level architecture business focused compared to a lot of the sessions we've had today that were kind of very detailed technology focused to varying degrees. This session leans more towards the business driver side, but there is going to be a little bit of demos and technology mixed in, so that makes it a little bit different. The second thing is that this is a story. Like, I'm going to tell it like a story, hopefully it's fun like a story, and it's a true story. Everything in the story, it's not based on a true story, it's as good as I can remember it. So I'm hoping that that's fun. And third, this is our last session of the day, so I hope this is a little bit interactive. You'll see what I mean as we go through. I'm going to show some things. Hopefully some of it will look familiar, and we'll have dialogue from there. So, agenda. First, I want to talk about this situation appraisal. So what's going on in this particularly large customer that I'm supporting? What are their business problems? What are they trying to solve? At least those are the questions I should have asked when I first started at this customer. But you can see, you'll see how this kind of turns out. It's not quite that smart. After that, I'll talk about some of the technical solutions, what I proposed, what we ended up doing, how it ended up being worked in, some of the different tools that are used. What you're all going to see through this whole event of the past 2 days is a very common theme around infrastructure as code, using tools like Ansible, using version control systems like Git. That's generally common for a lot of the network automation solutions, and mine is no different. But there are some twists along the way that make this kind of unique and very specific on large bureaucratic customers. So let me just take a quick poll of the audience. Who works in a company that is very slow to change, like manufacturing, maybe some energy organizations, hospitals, or any government organization or large enterprise? Who feels like they work in a highly bureaucratic, slow-moving environment? Yeah, so probably half. Now leave your hands up. So those who do, how many are happy with the state of your current network automation at work? Wow, a couple guys. Okay, so let's go. So the rest of you are unhappy, and that's how I felt too. So this session is for you. So we'll do a quick live demonstration. I'm not going to peruse through all of the different components because that would just be way too hard at 4 o'clock. So we're going to I'm going to show the demo from the user's perspective. And we're going to create the product, as I call it. We'll download it to the machine and we'll look at what comes out of the system. And this is ultimately what's being used in production today. Then I'll talk about the business outcomes. So again, unlike some people, I can talk about this. So I'll talk about, how did it improve our lead time? How did it improve our quality? How did it save the U.S. federal government millions of dollars? Okay, so what's really going on? What I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of draw in real time the current workflow. Now, the way this customer works is they have a knock and they have a bunch of people standing by. And what the customer does is the customer calls. This is a service provider type environment, except extremely bureaucratic. So, customer picks up the phone and says, I need connection from site A to sites B, C, and D. So in real life, a real service provider would probably do something like, I'm going to use my automation, I'm going to do my route targets, I'm done. 2 minutes, right? No. So the way this works is, the way it works today is somebody opens up a Microsoft Word document, and from that Word document, there is a text, not even Notepad, so it's Word. So it's like rich text for no reason. So in this Word doc, you're already left. See, look, you're done now. You already think this is bad? Wait. So we have this Word document. It's got like yellow highlights over the x.x.x.x that needs to change, right? Who's never seen that? So where do you get that? Oh, now you got to open your IP sheet and search for the IPs that need to go in for that particular customer based on what IPs they're supposed to have. In my particular environment, the service provider happens to know all the IPs of all the customers I could possibly call. So we have this massive set of spreadsheets, so we have to find it. Okay, so now we build our configurations, that's cool. Now we repeat that process again using basically the rest of the Microsoft Office suite, because that makes sense. And we take a Visio diagram with x.x.x.x, and we draw all the connectivity that we're going to do based on some Visio templates, and then we put that into a PowerPoint. So it's basically the diagram and the config. So we put the configs into PowerPoint as images. So there is no, you can't copy paste. That literally by design, you can't copy paste. Okay? So that's how that was made. Then we take that PowerPoint, we put it into a PDF, and it ends up being like 40 pages long. And then we have to continue to use Microsoft Office Suite products. So here we use Outlook to transfer it over email. And even though this first person who built all these configs is competent enough to just apply them to the network, we need to have more jobs. So we have another team of people who receive that file, open up the PDF, and they print it out. This is another thing I didn't show here. They actually print it out and deliver it in a manila folder and give it to another guy who types it in line by line, character by character, every time. Okay, we've been doing this since about 2007. That's your tax money at work for all the US citizens in the room. So, that's how it worked. So, what's wrong with this picture? Just shout out, like, why is this a bad idea? Just give it to me. Okay, what else? Okay, obviously tons of opportunity for failures. Everything is hand-typed. We're copying data between multiple formats. There's no source control in anything. It's slow, it's ineffective. It's not a good use of time and money. Here's just a partial list of things I came up with. I'm not going to read all of them. But my favorite is in the bottom right. It's not 1998 anymore. We need to find a better way to do our network automation. I know some of you guys who were writing code in 98 were like, you feel slighted now because you actually have a better solution than this one. The general idea, the reason I say this is the guy who fought me the hardest on this, but we'll talk about our cast of characters later, but the guy who fought me the hardest on this is right around the time that he joined the government, and he didn't learn a thing in 20 years, so it was real hard to convince him. But anyway, these are all the problems with a solution like this. It's like the worst possible way to do anything. Even Notepad would have been better. So here's what I came up with. And I thought it was a pretty good solution, and it's pretty consistent with the things we've seen today. So I'm going to have a programmer log into a Linux box, and I'm going to install Ansible on it. We're going to take that approach because it's pretty easy. It's easy to learn. Don't need a lot of coding skills. We're not really doing anything hard. We're just changing route targets and adding tunnels and things like that, right? Okay, we'll use Git for version control. Nothing crazy. Doesn't need to be extreme. We'll just keep track of the changes that we make. It's not that hard to use. I figure a couple of weeks of training will be all set. We'll do some kind of continuous integration. Again, it's very high-level design. I'm not showing all the crazy links. I like GitLab at the time. It was a private controlled environment, so GitLab with CI made sense. I think it was Hank who did some GitLab CI earlier. I don't know if he's here, but he was showing that earlier. And then this orange server is kind of our Ansible control machine. I'm showing it just as a separate device. And we'll use the Ansible control machine to manage our network infrastructure. So way less components, mostly open source stuff. Easy, no email. We don't need diagrams anymore. We can completely obviate the need for all that stuff. I think everyone in the room sees the value prop in doing something like this. How do you think the customer reacted when I showed them this? What do you think they did?
Said immediately.
Yeah, that. They're like, you're absolutely crazy. Right? So they thought I was completely insane and out of my mind for it. And you know what the funny part about that is? They were right. The reason they were right is because I didn't really understand. I mean, I've worked in the government my whole life, from being in the Marine Corps to supporting tactical units in the field to doing all different kinds of work. So I've been around for long enough and I really should have known better. So I kind of stepped back and I said, okay, let's shelve that idea for now. And let me see if I can come up with something that suits the specific needs that they have. Now bear in mind that I can't just ask them these things because no one will ever say this out loud. But I think we all collectively are going to agree with what I'm going to say next. So let's talk about success drivers. Think about business on one side and government on the other. There's really not a lot of alignment between the two regardless of what you hear. So for example, in a business, generally we're trying to do one of two things. We're either trying to grow. For example, we've got some startups in the room that are primarily focused on growth right now, trying to find their engine of growth so they can increase sales. Or we have maybe mature companies that are trying to improve profitability by doing whatever cost-cutting measures that they figure out, whatever. Generally, it's going to be something along these lines, right? We agree with that? This is the goal of a business? The goal of a government is very different, or even large bureaucratic organizations that might exist. This is the #1 driver, period. I mean, you hear it from politicians all the time, but I'm telling you, even in lower level governments, even in the military, this is #1. So my plan, even though I wasn't planning on it, everyone knew that it would eliminate their jobs. And they're like, we can't have that. So we still need to be involved somehow. So I immediately started thinking, okay, I need to keep these cogs in the machine, but maybe I can make it so that they can do less damage. So my thinking started to change. Businesses are trying to gain a competitive edge and succeed in the marketplace. Pretty obvious. Bureaucracies are trying to survive forever. And that's actually their job. Right? I mean, we don't want to see governments dissolve unless they're really terrible ones, but in general, that's the purpose. You can, I've read it in a book recently, you can wipe away half the bureaucrats from any process, and the process will live on. That's why they're designed that way. In a business, we have to adjust to market changes. It's important to, that's how you maintain your competitive edge. That's why we're all in this room. But bureaucracies are focused on protecting the status quo. It's important for people's jobs, many people are tenured, and they're really not interested in doing things a new way. So again, everything on the right, this is feeding into my thought process now. How can I develop a somewhat modern automation solution that meets these needs? It doesn't violate any of these general drivers in a bureaucratic success environment. So companies, they like to have, the macho person on top who makes the tough calls. And, we all see little vignettes and stuff at like startup companies. Well, in government, there's committees. Everything is decided by a committee, and it drags on for months or years. And last, I'll just show both at the same time. Businesses are measured by the results, especially public companies. We all know this. We've all felt quarterly pressure. Those of us in sales have to close deals. It's hard. Businesses want to look like they're doing the right things. They want to look like they're investing in automation. They want to appear like they're on top, and they go to great lengths to make people perceive them that way. But they don't actually want to do it. So how can I make this government not lose jobs, continue to operate the way it's always operated, empower the committees, and at the same time, make it look like these guys are the coolest thing since sliced bread? That's my job. So you see how that completely changes what our architecture is going to look like, because I can't just do what I suggested before. I need to take a completely different approach. Remember the approach that we had before? The ultimate output from that approach was a giant PDF file with diagrams, we've all built diagrams in here of the IPs and the ports on every interface and all that. It takes like 10 years to make. That, plus all the configurations for all the different nodes that are part of this particular kit. So I'm going to start off pretty similar. I think that we can still use these components. We can still introduce source control. We can still introduce continuous integration to some extent. We can still use a tool like Ansible to help us here. The difference, though, is that the output from Ansible is going to be a zip file now. And it's going to contain a collection of those artifacts that we were manually building before. So for example, we've talked a lot today about using Jinja templates and variables. Instead of writing it out to the network device, I can just write it to a local file. That's not technically impressive at all. Okay? But it's not about being technically impressive, it's about looking technically impressive. We're driven by perception now. We also want to have this as a text file so that we could copy and paste it if we wanted to, so we can also save time and errors that way. So you see how these are small wins that we can achieve in a government organization that is extremely resistant to change. Also in here, and this is probably the technical pinnacle of this solution, is the automatic generation of diagrams with IPs and port numbers and all the little doodads that you like to put on there to feel important. That's all there. And I'll show you a little bit about how that works with a very simple example. We still got to leave the email because remember, we got to send this packet, we call it a packet, we got to send this to the guy who can't lose his job because he's got to configure the network devices. So still the same number of people on this chart. I've just added some tooling to help with the creation of the existing packet. Does that make sense? So I'm creating the same product we used to do manually, just automatically. I didn't actually remove a lot of barriers. I just sped up the gaps between the barriers, if that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit more detail about what the overall solution looked like. So I'm drawing the same picture again. I'll tab through a little bit here. So I'm using my programmer type guy is using Ansible again, and 5 different kinds of source files are in this project. The first three we've talked about quite a bit today, and yesterday overall I got YAML files, some Python code behind the scenes, and Jinja 2. So for templates, that's just basic Ansible stuff. The one at the bottom is Markdown. This is just for the readmes and some of the documentation I generated, not terribly exciting. Who's ever worked with LaTeX before? Yeah. How many people like working with LaTeX? Yeah, okay. So what I did was, a lot of people are like, why don't you use restructured text? Why don't you just do it in Markdown? It's like, because these guys need their pretty little diagrams because they're going to melt and die if they don't have them. So something, a rich text, a way to do advanced typesetting with LaTeX was the only solution I could find. And I'd never used it before last year. It was an absolute nightmare. Not only was it a nightmare to learn how LaTeX worked and get it working and then getting it installed automatically and doing all the other stuff that you need to make it work programmatically, but I needed to take LaTeX and to make it look like a Jinja template so I could populate all the variables before I built the diagram. And I'll show you a little bit. I'm not going to go through all the tooling because it's just too much. But this is all encapsulated into an Ansible role. And I'll show you how you can kind of consume that at a high level. But the general idea here is I want to be able to deliver the packet in the same format with the same icon of the guy up front and the waving American flag so everyone can feel happy. That's all got to be there. Okay, you can't skip on that. That's critical data. Right? So that's part of it. That's why I use LaTeX. Okay, the output from the tool, as I said earlier, it's a zip file, and here's what the contents would look like expanded. If I need to provide configurations for 5 different sites, you'd get 5 folders, we call them nodes. You'd get 5 of these nodes, and in each one, you'd get, however many configs. So if I had 5 branch offices, and each one had 2 routers, a switch, and a firewall, you'd end up with 5 folders with 4 text files in each one. Does that make sense? Basic kind of double for loop logic there. You'd also get a PDF, which is the detailed technical procedure, and it tells you exactly what to do. We're writing instructions for 20-year-old people in the military deployed out in the field. We can't assume that they really know a whole lot. It's like, copy this config to here, check this port, issue this show command. So who's ever written technical documentation before, like a how-to guide, ever in your careers? Probably everyone, right? And usually when you write those guides, it's pretty generic, like, log into your core router and do show IP OSPF neighbor and look for 2 neighbors, right? You might write something like that. This will say, log into router 17 and do show IP OSPF neighbor on interface gigabit 0.123 and look for this specific IP as the neighbor. And the reason I know that is because I've automated the entire solution. I have all the configs. It's almost like a cheap version of Batfish, except way worse. Where I'm able to do something like, I know all the data ahead of time, so as I'm writing this how-to guide automatically, I can just populate the specific addresses in there so that I don't have to open up my IP sheet over here and say, what IP am I looking for? So I'm trying to eliminate those other steps, but not eliminate people. Right? Can't do that. That's how you'll get crushed for doing that. So I can still use Git, and specifically here, I'm using GitLab for the CI/CD. It's just a choice I made. And often here we have this concept of a GitLab runner. Again, Hank showed some of this earlier. This is just a way for me to say that when I make changes to my environment and I want to, add nodes or remove modes or develop a new packet, I have a way to do that. And I'm just going to quickly tap through these 4 stages. We talked about CI/CD a little bit. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but I want to reinforce the theme for those who haven't done a lot with continuous integration. This was the test pipeline I developed in GitLab. First, I want to do linting on all my files. I want to say all the YAML files in my whole project, and again, this is just one of the projects. There were a few others I did. So there were a couple hundred files total. Go through, lint them, make sure the syntax is right. This runs in seconds. Then after that, I want to run my unit tests. So the Python code was some integrated functions that I used within my Ansible stuff in order to make everything fit together. I wanted to do some unit testing on those. Again, I put a lot of effort into the backend infrastructure so that things didn't explode without revealing any of this to the user. So this just happened when you do commits. Then I have role tests followed by playbook tests. So in Ansible, a role I like to think of a role as kind of like a class in an object-oriented language where I can encapsulate everything from tasks, kind of like methods, to data attributes, to handlers, and all those other kinds of Ansible goodies you can encapsulate within a role. This particular product that I developed is a role, and that's where where this testing stops. Now in real life, we have multiple playbooks that consume the role, and those got their own tests afterwards. In real life, this whole pipeline runs in about 14 minutes. And if it fails somewhere in between, then we get a message through Mattermost. So Mattermost isn't really well known. It's basically a Slack equivalent. It comes with GitLab and it's free, and because we operate in a controlled, closed-off environment, we can't access like cloud-based stuff like Cisco WebEx Teams or Slack or whatever. So we just use all these things kind of together, and they fit into a couple virtual machines, small footprint, easy, right? So this is the actual solution I got built. Or this is what I proposed, I should say. This is like, here's my plan. I built kind of an MVP, and I, started to explain at a high level how it worked to some of the other people. What do you think their reaction was to this? It was still bad. And the reason it was still bad is because I think at this point, and this is, I was kind of at like that inflection point where I was right there over the hill, but they were still putting up this front. And I finally got to the point where I said, we were all having this argument over like group text message at 10 p.m. Like these are guys I'd worked with before, and we're all, rage texting, and I was like, okay, look, we need to get together and sort this out. So I said, let's get together at the NOC. So we all traveled and met here, and I said, look, let me show you what this is. So we spent the weekend, I built everything out. I said, let me just show you, because all of these components behind the scenes aren't things that you interact with, and I've built this CI infrastructure to help maintain the quality of it. So when you drive your car, you operate the vehicle, but you don't think about the engine every time. It's very similar. So now let's just do a quick demo. I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So I'm not going to go into, oh great, timed out. It's okay, let's see if it will. Sweet. Wow, that was not the right directory to be. Okay. So I'm not going to go through all these files, but what I really do want to focus on is the only thing the users have to do here. Here's a file of just some basic data about, a specific site. And I've got that break right around the middle of the file on line 14. Everything above the line, this is just static data that's going to go into my configurations and into my documentation. So for example, you're going to see when I generate my documentation, there's a diagram. And on one side of the diagram, there's a remote site, and on the other side of the diagram, there's like a corporate headquarters data center type site. Well, if you know in advance, like, okay, I've got these servers already set up in my data center, there are the IPs for them, you want to add that to your diagram so everything looks nice and neat for the guy in the field, so that when he's troubleshooting, he can say, oh, I can't log in, maybe there's a AAA problem, let me try to ping the TACAC server, whatever. So this is just information that really isn't actionable, but you want to add it to your documentation maybe. Now the stuff at the bottom, this is where the meat of it is. You can see that's a list of dictionaries. For those of you not familiar, you can see that tab symbol on 16 and 21. Those are just the beginning of a list element. And I've got a list of dictionaries with like 5 keys each. This just identifies each node. So in this particular case, I have 2 branch sites. Again, I'm using branch instead of like some military terminology, but you get the point. So in this particular environment, I'm connecting remote sites into an MPLS Layer 3 VPN by a service provider. So I have a site ID, which just has to be unique. It's just the name of a site. There's an uplink interface on the router. That's the interface that needs to be configured. It's the interface that needs to be drawn on the diagram, right? You need a little G00 on the diagram, so it'll get fired. The PE to CE network, so this is just what is the connectivity network to the provider. I'm providing a subnet there. I have another subnet for the internal LANs inside the site, and then maybe I have a switch at the site that can specify the number of ports. Basic information. So with no training, this is a serious question. I'm not going to get offended if you don't raise your hand. With no training and about a 2-minute explanation, how many of you think that you could explain how to fill out these fields to one of your junior engineers with no automation experience? Think you could do that? It's really, I try to keep it simple, right? I don't have a crazy JSON hierarchy and Yang models and open config, none of that. Like, I didn't want to go that way. It's a list of dictionaries, and when you want to add new sites, you just copy those 5 lines and make some edits on what your new sites are. Once you've identified that, of course there's some templates behind the scenes that are doing stuff, but I want to get through this, so I'm just going to run the thing. This is going to run in about 20 seconds. So what it's going to do is it's going to generate now, in this particular environment, I didn't show the templates, but there's a router and a switch at each site. So I should end up with 2 folders with 2 configs in each, okay? And what we're going to see is we're also going to get within those 2 folders, there's going to be a PDF for each site. There's also a couple other goodies behind the scenes, like SHA-256 and a couple other things, but there we go. So that whole thing ran in like 20 seconds or so, and I'm just going to use WinSCP to just download it to my laptop, and it probably timed out. because, well, why wouldn't it? Okay. So you might not be able to read that, but what I do is I put a military-style date stamp on it, so it's sorted year, month, day, along with the time, so that there's no confusion over when things were generated. So I'm going to download this real quick, and we'll break it open. So this is what we're going to be distributing to the people who need to do the implementation. So I don't know how readable that is, but in general, there's these two folders at the top. There's a branch 1 underscore with the date, and branch 2 underscore with the date. What I want to do is I'm not going to go too much into these details, but you can see inside that folder, there's 3 files. There's 2 text files, one for the router and the switch. Those are just regular configs that have been templated. We're not going to scrub these. I just want to show you what they look like. Those specific networks that we showed earlier, they get rendered appropriately. So here's the config I can copy paste. No problem, not impressive, right? But this is what they also get. Here's just some, whatever logo. Obviously in my customer it was some like Army crap, but here's what you would get. Simple kind of cover page, some logo, then some specific, what site is it for, who prepared it, and what's the date. Now this was using LaTeX behind the scenes. Now, I've got my basic table of contents, just like you'd have in any kind of how-to. Here's all the steps. Now in real life, this would probably be a 10 to 20 page document. Here, it's a very short document because I'm trying to illustrate the point. But normally you'd have a lot of different things to click here, list of contents, list of figures. Again, this is all automatically generated. If you had 100 sites, it would be really handy to have this so you don't have to make all this stuff. But if we go to site installation, it takes us to this page. Maybe I'll zoom in a little bit, but you don't really have to read this to understand what's going on here. I make a kind of a list, and I just have very entry-level instructions on how to do the installation. Rack your equipment, do this, turn it on, make sure you get these software versions. Remember that data that was in that variables file? This is just where I reprint the static data so that you can show what's going on. Because that file was in version control, if we ever decide that we need to update our code, the cool thing to do would be, let's do a script, and we'll use NetMiko, we'll update all our code, and all our nodes, and that's awesome. But how many people are not going to have jobs after do that? Wrong answer. So instead, what we can do is I'm being serious here. We go and we change that string into variables, we rerun the packets, we email them out again, and we tell everyone to update their code. Now everyone's fat, dumb, and happy, and busy, and we still managed to get at least some value out of it because we had a consistent code base, at least according to the documentation. Here's what I was talking about with the specific show commands. Like if you look at line 9, I'll highlight it. That part right there, very specific show commands for specific routes based on your specific site with specific interfaces. That's useful for people who have no idea what they're doing, which is a lot of people, for being honest. So, scrolling down a little bit, the way I do this is because I'm really not that great with LaTeX, is I make a base diagram in Visio, and I export it as like a PNG. I draw the diagram, and then I overwrite text on top of it. So you see like these little tables and stuff, that's just me writing text. So I say, okay, in my site, I have these VLANs, here are the subnets, here are the IPs. You see the PE and CE IP addresses there, so the guy hooking it up is like, yeah, okay, I know what to ping now, and he knows how to troubleshoot. And on the right, I'm just showing, okay, those are all the corporate servers that have already been up, so if I'm trying to test connectivity, that's how I can do it. Now the user still does all the work. The machine only gives you the information to help you do the work. So you think about those constraints we talked about earlier, they didn't violate any of them, right? So by the time I got to this point, and by the time people saw this, and they used it for a week or two, their outlook completely changed. Also even basic stuff like if, maybe you have a fiber technician who wants to take a record about, hey, I did a optical power measurement, they want to, put some data in here about whatever they measured in dBm, you can just do something like that. You can save it, you can print it, you can tape it to the router so that it's there, right? Those are things that, administrators do. So, again, not the world's greatest LaTeX, but I hope the value prop is clear for organizations where taking big steps in automation just isn't going to happen. There was absolutely no communication with any network device. That's why it ran so fast, and that's why I didn't have to deal with secrets or inventories or any of that. The advantage is that I get documentation and configs that I can ship to people who can apply them later, and there's extremely low risk. You also have the opportunity to go through and say, I think something's wrong here. I read through the document, I looked at the config, something's wrong, let me go through. That makes people feel important. But here's a hint, the machine's almost never wrong, but don't tell them that. Okay, so I got just a few minutes left, and I'm going to quickly go through the last piece. Actually, no, I got to 4, right? I got all the time. Sweet. Okay, so I want to focus on three things here. I want to focus on quality, lead time, and cost, basically. So first things first, when we used to do this by hand, I estimated, we did it for hand by about a year when I was there. I didn't witness it for the first 10 years, but the year I did, we screwed this up about 1 in 3 times. Who's ever done like a GRE tunnel and you get your source and destinations mixed up and just stupid stuff like that we've all done, that happened 1 out of every 3 times. And oh, by the way, we did about 500 of these a year. So that's a lot, hundreds of problems. So we managed to get that down to about 2%. It was about 1 in 50. So we saw, out of 500, we'd have maybe 10 problems or so, not nearly as many. And most of that came from just data entry problems. Now in real life, hand jamming IPs in that variables file, that's not actually how we did it. I had a little bit cleaner approach, which is a little bit hard to describe here. But in general, my main point here, massive order of magnitude increase in quality. Likewise for lead time, it used to take us 8 hours to turn around this request. So when a customer says something very basic, like, I need to stand up this new site, it's a very simple site, or I need to do this new VPN, I need to do these VRFs, that used to take 8 hours. Because generating the configs took 3 hours, even though it was about 2 minutes worth of work. And then you had the diagram, which was a whole other production. It took a long time, usually more than 1 working day. You just saw me do it it was obviously less than 30 minutes. You just saw the demo in a very short amount of time. Now imagine I was typing in some new variables, maybe I wanted to do a verification, I still need to email it to someone, they still need to apply it. 30 minutes, pretty fair bet. So by my math, it's about a 16-fold improvement. Okay. In terms of cost, based on what I know about contracting labor rates and the kinds of people who worked here, I just happen to be privy to that information. About $2 million to save per year. This is a combination of cost avoidance between having to not hire new people as the network was scaling. So somebody said earlier, doing more with the same. That's basically what this is. This wasn't cost savings, it was money that didn't get spent as a result of growth. Okay, so pretty, for basically no money invested, we were able to get substantial outcomes. So now this is I'll talk about the cast of characters. I didn't want to weave them too much into the story, but basically everything I just described was a real story. And this was around February, March of last year. So there were 3 people that were part of this process. This guy, Mr. Shut Up and Color. Okay, this guy's actually a personal friend of mine, but he says this to me a lot. I want to smash him when he does it. So, Mr. Shut Up and Color, he was always telling me, hey, I'm behind you on this, I think it's great, but I need you just to march to the beat of the drum for a while until we come up with a strategy or some other stupid nonsense like that. So we actually had lunch recently. I haven't seen him in a long time. We had lunch recently and he says, hey, what you did was remarkable. It's really had a huge impact on our operations. I said, cool. The next guy, Mr. We've always done it that way. This is that late 90s Army guy who hadn't learned anything in 20 years. He started off as the most vocal opponent of the whole process. The whole idea that we would ever do this, he was just completely against it. I later found out that he was the one that invented the original terrible process in 2007. I found that out actually recently, long after all this transpired, which gave me some context. Within a week of it being out there, he realized he was the operations lead for this entire thing. And he realized how important it was and how they could never go back. So he very quickly became the biggest public advocate for it. And he fought a lot of people who tried to kill it. So I managed to turn him into a friend, and the best part was that I could move on and do other things with my life than play with LaTeX and Ginger 2 all day. So it was great that I was able to do this and kind of move on. This guy was the boss. I didn't like him because he was a lot like me. He was loud, he thought he knew everything, and we just clashed all the time. So he was very autocratic too. He's like, don't do this because I said so, or do this because I said so. And then once I showed it to him, he wanted to start to show it to other people to get other people on board because everyone saw that it was so low risk and so high value because we were so poorly performing that anything was better. Literally anything would have been better. So you really can't make a mistake at this point. So that worked pretty well. So me, I enjoyed feeling cool for about 20 minutes until, we had problems pretty shortly thereafter. But in general, this is kind of a success story, at least for me. And again, I say me here. I had a few collaborators, misfits that wanted to help fix the network too. There were a few people who helped me with it as well within the organization. And a few people managed to take it on. Junior engineers took an interest in it. They took ownership of it. They taught themselves Git. They signed up for Kurt Byers courses. They did all that stuff on their own without me even telling them. So I started to change the culture very, very slowly. But again, what you don't want to do is convince people why they need to lose their jobs. You can't convince people why the government has to change. It's just not going to happen. So play within the confines you've been given. We've talked a lot today about how to get started. We've talked about tools to get started and processes and low-risk approaches. This is the ultimate low-risk approach. And this is the approach that lets everyone continue to stay, basically stay stupid, continue doing the things the way they've been doing them, but just shortening the cycle between the different steps of the process and reducing the errors that can occur. So, before I take questions, that link at the bottom, this is all encapsulated into an Ansible role. Because it's public now and I'm not using GitLab, I have it tied in with Travis CI, so there's a detailed regression test that runs. It's published through Cisco DevNet, so it's all free, completely open. It's probably one of my best documented pieces of source code I ever wrote, because I had to make it work in this environment where people know so little. So you can benefit from that. If you feel like maybe you're doing a new rollout and it's a really big bureaucratic environment, you're setting up a bunch of new manufacturing plants somewhere, and you're like, hey, I want to, they're all the same, they all have the same diagram, you can use this to generate the configurations for them and the diagrams. Now, it'll probably be some upfront work. You have to do a bunch of LaTeX, but if it's something you do regularly, let's say you're building a new, 10 new plants every year for 5 years, this might be the right approach. You saw me use it in a simple branch site example. You can even use it for more transactional activities. For example, in the service provider case, we would have a setup and a teardown packet. Okay, not a great answer, but something we can do. What questions do you have? How many people think this might be useful in their environment? Probably a couple, right? Yeah. Yes?
What do you think from a soft skill side of things? Have you learned anything in approaching this kind of conversation?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. So from the question was, in terms of soft skills, what have I learned in dealing with large bureaucratic organizations? I would say the way I learned it was really the hard way. So I came in, I had this great idea, and I knew it was the right thing to do, like dead set, this is how it's going to work. And I quickly got rebuffed. And then I went back, and it was mostly through introspection that I kind of figured out, how does the government operate? I mean, I've been in this game for a long time, and I know what people are afraid of, and I know what they care about, and I know how the money works. So I took that, and those kind of, if you remember from that business comparison slide, those things on the right-hand side with bureaucracies, I feel like those are kind of my guiding principles for the soft skills. Because when you approach people, even in large enterprises, we've all seen it. How many people have seen turf wars in politics in an enterprise at work, right? Some division president wants to maintain his big, strong organization so that he can tell people how many people work for him, right? We all meet people like that. Dealing with people like that, you don't want them to say, oh, now you can cut people from your division, because that's not what he wants. What he wants to do is, he probably wants to save money, so that's part of it, but he wants to survive forever, like a bureaucracy. He wants to, even though he wants to call all the shots, he wants to have these committees of yes men and fall guys behind him to take the blame. I hate to play into people like that, but if you're trying to grow your business in those environments, if you take that list of the bureaucratic drivers and use those to govern how you interact with them, I think that's your best chance for success. Just keep those in mind. Great question. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned that the turning point was really getting them all in a room and showing them. To get to that point, you also mentioned, and I get this instantly, right, the committee, right, the sluggish committee factor. Did you find that you wind up taking aside individuals and maybe working with them or trying to get them more on board?
That's exactly what I did. So the three guys I listed here were kind of opponents, but when I went into the knock, they all knew how much it would simplify their lives immediately, so I started with them. I bypassed the knock managers because they were just gatekeepers, and I just said, whatever, middle fingers, I don't care. So I rolled in one day before they got there, and I showed it to all of them, and I showed them how to use it, and I basically said, hey, boss is going to be here in an hour. I'm going to show him this, and we'll see what he says. And everyone was basically saying, yeah, this is the approach we need. And a lot of this, we see this in the government a lot, is you'll have some spokesmouth manager who acts like he speaks for everyone that works for him. My people don't want that. They're never going to understand this. So this is too hard for them. It's like, did you even ask them? So I cut his legs out from under him basically before he even showed up. So I was a little bit underhanded, and there might have been some bribery with burritos. That might have happened, but in general, I was able to show up and get people to say it, because when he started the protest, everyone was like, no, I understand it. And this morning we did a few missions based on it. And he freaked out at that point. I didn't approve that. And I was like, whatever, dude, it's too late. Me, fire me, whatever. So, at that point I didn't care. Yes.
Did you have any, depending upon the network you're talking about, right? Was it hard to even get approval to install the tools you're talking about?
No, because I didn't ask. I just did it. Now, so it's a great question. So a lot of people in government have really struggled through this. I took a very ask for forgiveness approach here, and the reason I did that is because I found that if I do it and people like it, and if I can get, even though these three guys didn't have the authority to bless me to do this on the books, if I could get them behind me, it was going to happen. But in order to get them behind me, I had to get the frontline NOC engineers behind me first, so I kind of strategized that way, and it was a gamble for sure, but it worked all right. And considering how, and I told everyone just realistically, we all like to pretend government networks are so secure. They're not. I was like, I'm pretty sure that me putting Ansible on your network is not going to be like a catastrophic, everyone dies scenario. So I managed to beat them. It also helped that this was on just a transport-only network where we didn't have any like high-level services, the underlay type network, if you will. Nobody could come in, nobody could come out. It was generally secure, air-gap type environment, and I was like, what's the risk, really? And people generally bought that for a while, and to this day, it's not in the books. Whatever. So that may not work in your environment, and I'm not advocating losing your job over it, but if you have at least a good enough relationship with the team and you think that you have a chance of showing and succeeding and having people back you up, it might be worth that. And again, usually what will happen, even if they don't like it, they'll tell you to delete it. And then you delete it, and then you find a different way. Most of the time, it won't go further than that. You and I need to talk about VRFs later. Come find me. I got something for you. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, everyone.